is the Chewing the Cud podcast, a podcast for the UK dairy industry, brought to you from the southwest of England and listened to around the world. Hello and welcome to Chewing the Cud. My name's Andrew Jones and with me this time is...
Sarah Bolt.
Well, congratulations, Sarah.
For what?
Well, you're now an official member of the team.
I am. It's so exciting.
I know. I don't know if anyone saw it. We put it up on social media to celebrate International Podcast Day. Sarah's been a guest with us twice now. It's co-hosted, guest co-hosted basically twice now. But because of the fact that we are now twice a month and other commitments, Neil felt he can't do all the podcasts. So hence, Sarah is now with us. So Sarah's now an official member of the team. So for the podcast. So congratulations, Sarah.
Thank you. I'm very honoured. Thank you, Andrew.
Well, I know. I think it's the other way around. I mean, I'm grateful that you've said yes. People don't just have to listen to me. Anyway, as we record this, it's just gone. The dairy show was this week up at the Royal Bath and West. So did you have a good show, Sarah? I
did. I had a fantastic time. It's my favourite show of the year, I have to say.
Is it?
Absolute favourite. It's my stomping ground in the southwest, and
yeah, I got to be honest with you. Someone asked me early this week, "Oh, it's a good show. How does it compare to the others? I'd love to get down one day." And I'm like, I don't know. Apart from some local shows, I've never done any of. Oh no, I did Dairy Day. Must be at least 10 years ago now, but that's a long time ago now. But obviously, Dairy Day, Southwest Dairy Event as it used to be. Good show.
Absolutely love it. Absolutely love it. There's all the people you'd expect to see there. So all the farmers, and they do travel from quite far afield, whether that's the southeast or up further north. Yeah, all sorts. So it drags the crowd. Definitely. And it's also good to see all those friends and colleagues in the industry as well.
Well, that's what I always say, old friends and new. But you had a good show personally?
Absolutely fantastic, yes.
Yeah. So I don't think I really saw you till literally you were packing up,
I think I was packing up. I think I was probably shattered after a long day talking. What I do best.
I'll say what you do best then, isn't it?
In my element.
That's fine. But anyway, today we are talking about silage sampling. So give people hopefully an idea of what happens once their sample goes off in the post. Hello, I'm Andrew Jones.
And I'm Neil Gregor.
And welcome to the Chewing the Cud podcast, a podcast for the UK dairy industry.
Farmer, advisor, processor, and everyone else. We have topics and episodes that will interest you.
We discuss the practical and the technical aspects of different UK dairy industry topics.
We aim to make you think about what you're doing and ask yourself, can it be done differently?
Listen to us speak with specialists from inside and outside the industry about their area of expertise.
Subscribe and listen to episodes for free on your favorite podcast platform, or sign up to our website www.chewingthecud.com for podcast notifications so you never miss an episode, and links to our socials.
Or email us direct on podcast@chewingthecud.com.
If you like what we do, please share and leave us a review to show your support. And that's it. Enjoy today's episode.
Hello, and as we've already mentioned, today we are going to be talking about silage sampling. And our guests today are Richard Tunnicliffe, who is the Analytical Services Manager from Trouw Nutrition. Hello, Richard.
Hi, Andrew.
And also Isabelle England, who is Technical Account Manager from Trouw Nutrition. How are you doing, Isabelle?
Yeah, very well, thank you. Thanks for having us.
More than welcome. I think people, will be interested, because most people, all they know is the silage sample gets sent off and it comes back. So hopefully we're going to talk about a little bit what happens in between. But before we do, don't mind which of you goes first. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to go first. So I'm not from a classical farming background. My family's actually military. But because of being based in all those rural areas, I've sort of always had a link to farming in some respect and had a lot of friends from farms. And that's where the interest really came from. But fast forward a few years and a few lambing seasons, I headed to Harper Adams and I did a degree in bioveterinary science. Yep. And I'm sure everybody who's familiar with Harper knows that it's a requirement to do a placement year. So I did do that with Trouw Nutrition. And then when I finished up my degree, I made a call to see if there was any way that I could come back. And luckily there was. And then since I've been here, I've done 4 years as a ruminant nutritionist. So working on all the weird and wonderful things that we get in, mineral balances, legal levels, everything along those lines. but also looking at responsible minerals and maybe our grass watch service that some people may be familiar with.
Yep.
But now, while I still look at those, I'm much more customer facing, so a bit more knowledge sharing with technical teams, team training, and just sort of general progression with knowledge. And for me, that's it really. So I've been here 5 years now, nearly 6 if you include my placement year. So I'm a little bit of a poster child for that being my career.
And hence why you're here today, as you say, doing more of this kind of public-facing stuff. So then, Richard, what about yourself?
Okay, yeah, so I'm from this neck of the woods. I was at school in Ashbourne and talking...
Well, you're proper local then, aren't you?
Indeed, yeah. I was talking to my careers officer at school. He asked me what I was interested in, and I was enjoying the sciences. So I applied for a job in the laboratory at Frank Wright's, as it was then. Joined the company back in 1984. So I've been here quite a while.
Well, Save, you had the gold watch yet? Was it 40 years? It must be.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. So I joined as a lab technician, and then the company were very good to sponsor me through my further education, which I did as a day release. So I did ONC, HNC, and then a degree in analytical chemistry.
Yep.
And while that was happening, I sort of progressed through the ranks in the laboratory from senior technician to laboratory supervisor, then to laboratory manager. I've been involved in all different developments and aspects of the lab during that time, and there's been many, many changes.
I bet there has.
Yeah, so the department has grown while the company's grown to where we are today.
That's fantastic. You obviously must enjoy it if you're still there after
40 years. Yeah.
I was going to say it's obviously a credit to the company that you're both there. Sort of your whole careers so far have been there.
Been with Trouw,
absolutely.
So today we're going to talk about silage sampling, different aspects of that, and I'm hoping people enjoy this because I think they will. But I'm on farm. I take a silage sample, I put it in an envelope. It goes in the post. Providing the post office behaves itself, it's usually only 24 hours we get a result. Busy times like now, it can be 48. But it surprises some people on farm when I tell them that we should usually have the results back in 24 hours. They're usually expecting longer. But basically, I guess probably easy to start with you, Richard. What happens from that sample being arriving at your lab in the post to it being emailed to me before I then forward it on to a client, usually that evening? What happens in that 24-hour period, or well, I suppose 12-hour period from when you receive it to when you send the results out?
Yeah, okay. So if we start right at the beginning, one of the most important aspects of silage analysis is actually taking the sample in the first place. So you've done a lot of the hard work there, Andrew, already collecting the sample for analysis. So the most important part in any laboratory analysis is the quality of the sample received in the first place.
Sometimes it frightens me. Occasionally I've been on farm and they'll go, oh, well, our normal feed rep just takes it from the lump from where we were just feeding this morning rather than taking it across a nice W across the face. And it wants to be that mix, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. You can get a lot of variation across clamps and throughout the clamp. So we recommend, as you say, sampling in a W shape across the face, about a foot back from the face. Core samples are useful, but we'd recommend face because that's what you're feeding at the moment.
A core sample's a good place to start at the beginning of the season, isn't it? And then, as you say, once you've got off the ramp, sort of take a face sample and get going and take another go.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So, what we need is a good representative sample, because there's going to be a lot of decisions based on the results that we're going to issue. So the sampling is a crucial part of the step. So once that sample is taken and put in the post, as you say, the Royal Mail will then deliver to us hopefully the next morning. The post arrives with us between sort of 8:30 and 9 o'clock. We have a team of trained admin staff who open the post and sort it. So that's the first job. So
how many samples could you get a day?
Well, it can be anywhere between 100 to 400. So obviously peak season is normally between September to the end of November, when people are trying to sort out the winter rations, and people are starting to look at maize silage and whole crops as well. So the first part of the job, once the post arrives, is to sort it by crop type and by customer code. So all the crops are sorted out into crop types. So you have fresh grass, maize silage, grass silage, whole crops, hays, haylages, and then all the sort of things like TMRs.
Weird and wonderful.
Yeah. So, we advise people not to put samples in the post over the weekend. So ideally, don't post on Friday. We don't receive any post over the weekends, but other than that, absolutely fine. Obviously, the samples should be well sealed and get as much air out of the bag when you submit the samples. And then hopefully they'll arrive with us nice and fresh the next day. So once the crops have been sorted out, each sample is then allocated an individual lab number, which is its identifying number throughout its time in the lab.
Which is L and followed usually by
That's
6
right.
figures.
Yeah, correct. So once the sample has had a number allocated, the sample can be passed through to the laboratory for the analysis to start. At the same time, the analysis request form that comes in with the sample is processed by the admin team. So the admin team start entering all the data into the database. The sample goes into the lab and we start the analytical process.
I should say the poor people that do that, they need to, I need to do better writing sometimes. So I just see samples come back today and it's for a guy called Andrew and they've put Albury down. So my writing is not always
It would be a good help if everybody could be nice and clear.
I do try.
With the writing. Yeah. Yours is very good in comparison to some, Andrew.
Thank you.
So once the sample goes into the lab, the whole sample, whatever crop type it is, we're talking about a fresh NIR analysis at the moment, is emptied out into a container. The whole sample is then mixed together thoroughly, and all the technicians are trained to take a representative subsample of that material.
Which hopefully we'd have done to start with like me on farm, it would have been a representative subsample.
Exactly,
I've taken, isn't it?
So we ask for about half a kilo of fresh material, and then we mix that and then subsample that and then pack the cell, which goes into the NIR, which we perform the analysis on.
So NIR?
NIR is near infrared spectrometry is the method that we use. The sample is packed into a cell. We then...
How big's the cell?
It's a round cell, probably about 4 or 5 inches across. And a couple of inches deep. So that is packed, goes into the NIR. We then bombard the sample with near infrared wavelength light. Some of that light is absorbed and some is reflected. Basically, it's related to the organic bonds in the molecule. So different structures like protein and fiber absorb and reflect light at different wavelengths. Okay. And the amount of light emitted or reflected gives a measurement, if you like, of things like protein, fiber, and moisture.
So how long have you done it with NIR compared to, I guess it would have been wet chem beforehand, wasn't it?
Well, we've been using NIR here at Trouw Nutrition since the late 80s. And for
long time.
And for forage analysis, probably early 90s, I think we started doing forage analysis by NIR.
Okay.
The NIR can never be more accurate than the wet chemistry. Okay, so the calibrations that are required for each parameter are set up using the wet chemistry. And then the NIR is a predictive method of analysis. Each sample scan takes about 3 minutes to scan one sample through the NIR.
Okay.
And then you get multi-components predicted at the same time. So your dry matter, protein, fiber, pH all gets predicted at the same time.
Yep.
So the actual analysis time for the sample is about 3 minutes.
Okay.
So does that near infrared need to know what forage it is at that point in time?
Yeah,
or?
absolutely. Yeah. So there's different calibrations for each different crop type. So there'll be one for maize silage, one for grass silage, one for whole crops, and that's how the calibrations are created.
And how do they compare with wet chem? I'm guessing for starters, wet chem takes a lot longer. I'm guessing 10, 14 days for a wet chem result. But in terms of, I suppose, statistically, what's the difference between a wet chem result? And because let's be honest, I want to know what the silage is today. I don't want to wait a fortnight when we've moved on again. But what statistically, and obviously you can get some handheld on farm NAR machines, can't you, as well?
Yep.
But what statistically is the difference between a wet chem result and an NAR result?
Well, there is obviously analytical variation between NIR and wet chemistry. As I said before, the NIR can never be more accurate than the wet chemistry. But for people looking to give advice on farm in terms of protein, fibre, and moisture, what we're looking at, I always do it in terms of protein. So when you're doing a winter ration for a farmer to get his feeding right over winter, it's not important to know whether the protein level is sort of 16.2 or 16.4. You want to know if is it 16 or is it 18 or is it 10?
Yeah.
So
I say the only time I've done some wet chemistry is some heavy clover crops, silages, and that's what you've done. We've just done a wet chem on the protein and the occasion. Sometimes it hasn't been that much difference. Other times it's been a point or two, so it's been worth doing it. But again, it's been because we knew they were heavy clover lays.
Yeah, absolutely. And you will get analytical variation and you get massive variation across the clamp as well. So that's why an important sample is very a representative sample is very important. But generally, the correlation between wet chemistry and NIR is very good, particularly for the main crops.
I've just seen Sarah write a note, so I'm going to pinch it from her, I'm afraid. But with herbal lays coming more and more into it, where do they fit in for analysis?
Yeah, obviously herbal lays
they vary so much with what's even in the herbal lays, time of year, length of how long the lay's been in, all sorts. So that makes life more complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and as I say, these are sort of new crops that are now much more in vogue and much more in focus. And at the moment, there's not an industry standard approach. But we are looking to develop a calibration specifically for herbal lays, and this is how we've developed calibrations over the years. The grass silage calibration is okay, up to about 20% clover inclusion. Anything over that, we have a separate calibration for pure clover silage or high clover inclusions, and we will look to do the same for herbal lays.
Okay. So going back to where we were, you've bombarded it by the NAR. You've got all of this data has now been, I guess, uploaded to the machine or downloaded, wherever it happens to be. What then goes from there? Okay,
so once the sample has been scanned, we then get a printout of all the data by sample. And if there is an outlier, then that will be flagged up in the result list. Okay, so the calibration ranges are different for each parameter for each crop. For example, on grass silage, for protein, the normal calibration range goes down to about 8% and up to 20% protein. The same things, for dry matter and ash. If you get a very high result or a very low result, it gets flagged up as an outlier. Then that sample is taken out and not reported that day. So if we get an out,
certainly I've had a few of them over the years. I've rang it. Oh, I haven't had such and such. Oh, yes, because we've got an outlier. We're just double checking.
Yeah, that's right. So if we get an outlier, we have a secondary NIR calibration which we use the next day. If that confirms the original result, we then report the results. If it's still under query, we've got a wet chemistry facility here at Ashbourne where we can do the protein or the acid dry matter by wet chemistry to get the definitive result. And then that takes a bit longer. So that's how we handle the outliers. For all the others that are within the normal calibration ranges, there's a collation of data, if you like. That data is then processed, ready for import. So we have a CSV file with that day's samples to import into the database. Hopefully by the time the technicians have finished the analysis, the admin team will have finished their sample registration, and then we import the results into the database. Okay. So all the results get imported as a CSV file into the database, and then the technicians will then let me know that today's samples are ready to check and report. I will then get the results up on screen, do a print preview of the results for each sample, check them.
So you physically go through potentially 400 samples a day?
Yeah.
Double check them?
Yeah. So we actually look at the results. Obviously, I've not seen all the samples, but it's just to check that the results look plausible and realistic, and there's no obvious outliers or things like that included. Assuming then that everything is done okay, we then use the LIMS that we have that manages all our data to generate the PDFs and then email them out to the customer.
To the likes of myself or whoever it happens to be.
If all goes smoothly, that's normally at the end of the day. So around about 5 o'clock time. If we're in the peak season and very high volumes of samples, sometimes it's the first thing the next morning when the samples get released.
But then that's your nutritional analysis.
Correct.
What about then mineral analysis? Because that's changed from how you were doing it, that was taking 10, 14 days, whereas now, I've had some mineral analysis back within 48 hours, which makes a big difference, especially when you're trying to do those transition diets early in the season. You want those results sooner or later. So tell us the change, why that change come about, and again, what's the differences or how accurate are they, etc.
Okay, so the reason for the change is the same reason why we moved from wet chemistry to NIR analysis. It's a faster method of analysis. It's more cost effective. It offers better value for money for the customer, and it's more sustainable and economically friendly. So you're using less chemicals and acids and consumables. So these non-destructive methods of analysis are much more environmentally friendly. Okay. So for mineral profiling in foragers, that used to be done by acid digestion, and then followed by what we call ICP, which is inductively coupled plasma optical emission spectroscopy.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, indeed. And now we've moved away from the ICP analysis to XRF analysis. Now, XRF analysis is still a primary method of analysis. Okay, so the RCP is a primary method of analysis. XRF is a primary method of analysis. The only difference is the excitation process, really. So instead of measuring light emitted in a liquid argon plasma spectrometer, we bombard the sample with X-rays, and then we measure the scatter of the wavelengths when the electrons get knocked out by being bombarded with X-rays. This enables us to remove a lot of the acid digestion step, which takes up a lot of the time of the process for the mineral analysis.
And again, statistically, how accurate are they in comparison? Because I'm sure you've obviously done all your tests.
We've got a lot of comparative data between ICP and XRF, and the results are very, very good. The correlation is very good between the two methods.
And I mean, I know myself, and I know someone else put something on Twitter, I think the first time they got one back, another nutritionist. And I mean, well, I'm not going to say game changer, almost too big a word, but it is really, in the sense, especially if you've got your transition cows, you want to get those mineral analysis right to make sure that the diet's balanced correctly in those in that period. The fact that you can have them back, as I say, as I've had the best one 48 hours. I think one time I even had the mineral back before I had the nutrition analysis back. That's a massive change compared to, well, hopefully it'll be in 10 days, and sometimes it can be 14 days, and makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it does. Obviously, we had a lot of pressure on our ICPs for mineral analysis because we're a mineral company. So we have a very high demand for mineral analysis within the laboratory. So switching the forage mineral profile into XRF and getting an extra instrument into the laboratory has allowed us to speed up that turnaround time. So the initial process is still very similar. So the sample for mineral analysis is dried overnight and then ground. But the difference between ICP and XRF is the dried ground sample is then packed into a cell and scanned through the XRF.
Same size as the cell?
No,
for the
it's a much smaller cell for the smaller cell for the XRF. Yeah, probably only about an inch across. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that has enabled us to reduce the turnaround time for mineral profiling.
Makes a big difference. But then moving a step on, and I guess this brings Isabelle into it, but both of you really, I guess it's what's reading a result. What should people do and don't look? Because some people just look at ME crude protein, they don't look at the rest. Some people just look at the bars, and red isn't necessarily bad. What should people be looking for, or what are good indicators for a good silage when they see a sample?
I think one of the biggest points there is the colours that we have on our graphs. We do get this quite a bit. You're right in that red doesn't mean bad and green doesn't mean good, or blue indifferent or low. It's purely showing you if you're high or low versus the average that we're seeing, regardless of sort of where you're sitting. So it definitely shouldn't be interpreted that way. I think in terms of actually interpreting your report, it's always good to know where you are versus that average, but also looking at your silage, regardless of if it's minerals or for energy or protein, you need to understand the rest of your ration as well. Because if you've got the best silage in the world, but you aren't balancing it effectively, or something else is going wrong, then you're definitely not going to be making the most of it, are you?
But I guess the question to both of you, when you see a sample, what are the first things you look at?
First thing for me, I am looking at where it sits versus the averages, but then I probably go straight in. I'm looking at ME, protein. I also do use the Nutriop parameters as well, and I don't know if you do want to get into that today, but I'm looking at sort of actually how it's going to function within the animals. So looking at NDIP, dynamic energy. How well does this forage look like it's fermented? Is it stable? What impacts is it going to have on rumen health? I think it's looking at it as a whole picture, because sometimes
I should say there's Nutriopt on a Trouw, because that's obviously a Trouw specific thing, isn't it? Nutriopt.
Yes, sorry.
Nutriopt, the results on Nutriopt on a standard analysis are usually on the second page of your reports, aren't they? That information. So let's just put that aside for now, because I know what you're saying, Isabelle, definitely. But if you're just looking at the front page of your analysis, what would you go looking at after the standard crude protein ME, basically? Where do you go look? Or Richard as well, what would you go look at and go, well, that's a good silage?
Well, the things that I look at, I look at the dry matter, the protein, and then the sort of the intake characteristics. So the pH, lactic acid, VFAs, like that sort of thing. See if it's going to be palatable. So as Isabelle said, because you've got a red bar doesn't mean it's a bad result. And obviously you want a good level of protein, normally in the sort of typical range. But then you're looking at energy and fibre as well. So it's really, for me, how is this sample going to feed? Are the cows going to eat it? And, dry matter intake is one of the most important things to get right.
Well, what to you shows what's made a good silage?
Well, for me, it's a good level of dry matter, obviously not too high, but, a highest level of dry matter, protein in a normal range, good level of energy, and then not a too high level of fibre, and particularly, the ingestible fibres like lignin.
Yeah. Isabelle, you got any?
Yeah, I think on top of what Richard said, again, maybe coming back to the fibre, NDF, just because it links so closely to rumen function, making sure that's sort of in that normal range. I think we typically see 45 to 55% for grass silage.
Yep.
Just because, if you've got too much, you're going to be slowing down that fermentation and maybe reducing intakes. But on the other end of the spectrum, too little, you're going to allow that fermentation to occur a little bit too rapidly and maybe end up with some acidosis. But yeah, I think we're very much sort of the opinion we're looking at the whole picture. But yeah, the ones that Richard pulled out in terms of looking at dry matter, energy, protein are those key parameters really on that front page.
And you mentioned that. I mean, that can be. I'm not going to say it's a well, yeah, that the downside potentially of a multi-cut system, if you have a good spring, we haven't had one of them for a couple of years, but you have a good spring, is potentially that first cut can be lacking the fibre, can't it? And you end up basically putting fibre back in. I mean, I certainly remember doing a diet where I put 2 kilos of straw back in the diet because the first cut on the multi-cut was like rocket fuel, and you say it was just going through them too fast, and we needed to slow it back down again.
Yeah.
So you just mentioned there the system, the NutriOpt system. So how does that differ to the feed into milk system there, Isabelle?
So essentially our NutriOpt dairy allows us to understand and basically describe what's actually happening in the rumen a little bit more effectively. So we're really understanding that to feed the rumen, we're feeding the cow, but we're also meeting her requirements as well. So we're essentially able to maybe more accurately assess the energy and protein and the other values of feeds, how they meet the requirements of the cow, but also how to be nutritionally accurate and cost effective. So maybe it's easy if I do an example. So if we're thinking about protein, we'd be talking about the NutriOpt digestible intestinal protein, or NDIP for short. And that essentially just is your total supply of metabolizable protein. So it's the sum of any microbial protein yield in the rumen and any bypass protein that's digested in the small intestine. And it also gives you a calculation of the supply of essential amino acids. So we're just getting a more in-depth picture. It's almost like the next step, if you like, in terms of the latest developments of nutrients that we can look at for rationing.
I was going to say I wouldn't disagree with that, because I remember I started using NutriOpt. I think I originally started using it and then stopped using it because there was a few issues right at the beginning. We're talking long time ago now, 8, 9, I don't know, however many years ago now. And then obviously once I've gone back to it, I use it all the time now, and you definitely notice the difference. Initially, you're like, more boxes to get right. I've got to get it right. But it's like everything, as you learn it and you know what to do. And I know the biggest example I probably ever remember is swapping. There was too much rapidly fermentable carbohydrates in, and you just swap out some of the wheat that was in the diet for some barley, and all of a sudden it's
see the difference. Yeah,
definitely. It's like all these things. It's just it's getting it more accurate. It's more boxes to tick, but actually, as you're right, it does do a better job.
Yeah, definitely.
What extra detail does the farmer need to understand, I guess, at the end of it, as to when the farmer usually likes to understand the silage analysis alongside their nutritionists? So what else are they looking at, really?
In terms of the NutriOpt parameters?
Yeah.
So obviously, it's a whole page of extra parameters that we could probably spend hours talking about. But you're essentially describing what happens in the rumen more effectively. So if we want our rumen to be effective, the diet's got to supply those correct nutrients to the rumen microbes, essentially, hasn't it? So the better we're understanding how that feeds or how everything behaves in the rumen, then the more accurate we're going to be in total. So we can I mean, we can go into more detail on the individual parameters if you'd like.
Just on a couple of maybe some of the key features that you'd pick up on.
Yeah,
really.
So I think probably the main ones and potentially the easiest ones for people to relate to. So we did NDIP, but we've also got dynamic energy. So essentially, what this gives us is a measure of the total amount of energy available for milk production. So you're using it in place of ME. It's essentially this sum of products of fermentation in the rumen. You've got digestion in the small intestine as well, and then also energy coming from fermentation in the large intestine. So that's going to include things like VFAs, glucose, amino acids, your fatty acids. So essentially what it's giving you is an insight rather than this static number just saying this is your ME value. You're getting a little bit more insight into specifically how much energy that cow has to then utilize and where it's all coming from.
Almost partitioning it as to where it's then going to be used in the cow. Is that right? I'm not sure what question I'm asking, but I'm trying to understand what it does myself, I guess. So that's probably the vague question that I'm asking.
Yeah, it's essentially giving you that insight. So where maybe crude protein is that static number for how much crude protein is in that forage or in a raw material, your nutrient figures are just giving you that insight into how best it's going to be used. It's like if we look at maybe starch, for example, you would often just get a standard starch figure for whether it's maize, rolled maize, crushed maize, or anything like that. Whereas actually when we start using our nutrient figures, those values start to change to take into account that your crushed or rolled maize has now got a greater surface area for the animal to be able to utilize and get those nutrients out of. Does that explain it a little bit?
That makes so much more sense.
It's how it. One thing I remember being described to me when Nutriop first came in is the old FIM just concentrated in the rumen, and that was it. Whereas Nutriop, one, looked at how it was processed, because then it would be utilized differently, but also it concentrated from her mouth to her backside, basically, in all the way
and all
through.
The other.
Well, yeah,
but that whole picture almost.
It was the whole digestive tract rather than just in the rumen, and it definitely makes a difference. It definitely makes a difference. But then, based on what we've just talked about, what's the samples done this year? Because I ran into an old colleague earlier this season, or not that long ago, and he said he in 30 years has never seen so many sub 10 ME silages, and I know myself, the few I've done so far already, I'd say proteins are probably down, and I'm not surprised given the spring we had. But I mean, really, from the results you guys have got for this season, where are they looking, and what silage is looking like, and what should people be looking out for?
Yeah, so I think as a team this year, we've definitely acknowledged that it's been one of the toughest silage seasons in terms of the samples that we're seeing now. And analysing these samples is only giving us a clearer picture. So I think the most recent data set I've seen, we've had over 1,000 first cuts analysed and then 500 second cuts. And it's always the case when you're looking at averages. Averages, they're okay this year, but they're just okay. They're not anything spectacular on those averages. But when we start taking into account minimums and maximums and things like that, there's so much variation being seen. And like you say, if you're seeing those low MEs, they're obviously potentially a little bit away from the average, but it highlights.
Would you say you're seeing a bigger variation in the results?
Yes. Yeah, the comments have been that we've seen much more variation between minimums and maximums, and it's the same for minerals as well. The variation has got a little bit higher.
Okay.
But if we go into maybe a little bit more detail, for first cuts, on average, they are lower in dry matter. So I think we're sitting around, well, I've got the numbers here actually. So 33.7 average for first cuts at the moment, % dry matter. Yep. But they're also a little bit lower in maybe energy content just on average, and also their D values. But I think this is just reflecting that a lot of those crops were harvested maybe 2 weeks later than usual. I think that's sort of what we saw from our numbers. And by then, potentially they were a bit more mature. They had higher fibre content, which is probably just contributing to that lower energy density.
I've certainly not seen any up in the 12s this year. As you'd expect to see some, 12.4, 12.5 maybe. We just don't seem to be seeing that this year.
Yeah, and definitely not on average. And I mean, thinking about those changes maybe in dry matter as well, we did have a quick look at what it can mean in terms of actual production and costs and things like that. So even that small fluctuation in dry matter, so I think we looked if it dropped just 3%, if a cow's getting 12 kilos of silage, based on those MEs being a little bit lower, you could drop the equivalent of 1 litre of milk in energy supply, obviously depending on the analysis. But I think knowing what you're feeding and analysing individually is going to be a big deal for maintaining productivity.
Well, as you say, that makes rate effectively, if they're down half an ME per kilo of silage, that's, as you say, an average litre at 5.4. There you go. There's your litre of silage.
And then times that up over 150 head herd and over the winter. Yeah. It's
but on a rising milk price, I guess we're going to then have to do the maths to work out, is it worth spending the money to
that's what this ex-colleague was saying, that he's probably putting more fats than he has for a long time to balance it back up, because the energies just aren't there.
Yeah, exactly. And then also, if our dry matter intakes are going to be a challenge this year, getting cows to even just eat enough could be tough. So it is going to be paying attention to those feeding strategies just to keep those nutrient intakes up and support everything. Yeah.
So is there any handy tips you've got there, either sort of Andrew or Belle, as to what
we should be doing?
What farmers could be doing then to try and improve those intakes? Is there anything that specific that they could think about?
Use some molasses.
Yeah. Yeah, I really think for me it's really going to be just know what you've got in front of you. Let's go right back to the beginning, like what Richard was saying about getting that sample correct from the get-go, because it's amazing the variation you can see even from the front of the clamp, like from left to right, and just monitor everything and keep doing regular analysis as well, because we've done work on doing an analysis every week, obviously for the purpose of a study, but if you've only done it once in a month and that showed the highest ME and the highest protein values, and you took that one value to base the rest of your winter on, then it
varies day to day, doesn't it? Because I remember being at Reading, and they were showing us results of a trial they did. It was protein they were varying, was it 14, 16 and 18%? And ironically, they were using soya to balance it, but they were obviously using an NIR machine. I mean, it's obviously going back 5, 6, 7 years ago now. They were using an on-farm NIR machine to test their sample daily, and they put up a graph of the protein variation in the daily sample of silage they took. Now, I suppose if you made it quite a flat scale, then it probably wouldn't look that much. But when you opened it up, there was such a big variation from day to day, just within the same silage pit of what was being used. So, like you say, I mean, that's it. Is you should be sampling at least once a month, shouldn't you? Certainly, whenever you change pits, but ideally, you should be sampling at least once a month and tweaking diets occasionally, and trying to explain to some people that that's really the best way to be the most. What's the word? I guess profitable, because then you're not
sustainable as well.
Yes, optimum to do it. Because I know myself, thinking of an example of a client I've got, and when I first started dealing with him, I said, "Well, I need to sample your maize." "Oh, what do you want to do that for? Maize is maize." Fair enough, I said, but let's go sample it. So he went and sampled it. Anyway, I ended up saving him 0.5 kilo a cow a blend a day for the winter, and he went, "Yeah, okay, that was worth it."
Well, this is it, isn't it? It doesn't always mean necessarily that you're going to have to increase things. It can be a decrease as well, because you're
exactly. And for the cost of a sample relative to everything else, it's not a huge amount of money. Okay, if you're with a feed company, the likelihood is you'll get a number of them free built in. Personally, for myself, any sample you pay for on top of what else I do. But the cost to them is relatively small to potentially what you could be saving on your feed if your diet is correctly balanced.
Fantastic.
So what else are you seeing? You're saying things are a bit more varying, things are down a little bit, but so what should people be looking for this winter?
Yeah, I mean, if we stick along sort of looking at rumen health, maybe we do have our MFEB value, which is the nutrient fermentable energy and protein balance, and that is just what helps nutritionists balance the rumen a little bit more effectively. So it allows for that fine tuning that increases that efficiency. So maybe we're just looking at these first cuts now. We've got slightly lower fermentable carbohydrates and higher fermentable protein. So we'll need to maybe look at supplemental carbs for maybe that optimal microbial production. Second cuts, on the other hand, they do actually look to be a little bit better balanced, but they're still going to need that careful attention.
I'll say, how are they looking compared to the first cuts?
So in terms of second cuts, if we're looking at sort of rapidly fermentable protein, we're a little bit lower in second cuts. So we're at 82 grams per kilo dry matter on those second cuts versus 88 on the first cuts.
Yeah.
So then when we actually look at the MFEB balance, it's slightly lower in those second cuts, 8.1 grams per kilo dry matter versus 10.3 on the first cuts. And the thing to remember with MFEB is, or a whole ration, you're looking for a target to be 0, because that means your ration is perfectly balanced. Above or below, it means we're going to start seeing some shifts towards energy and protein, which is just indicating that the rumen might be a little bit unbalanced. So it's just sort of one of those quick tips to look at if you're ever looking at NutriOpt.
Okay. But if we look at them, I mean, as we've got it, I guess brings Richard back into it. I mean, you mentioned it a little bit earlier, Richard, in terms of the changes you've seen. I mean, obviously we've spoken about the NIRs being around a while, and we've got the mineral analysis has recently changed. What other changes have you seen in the, what do we say, 40 years you've been doing this now, and you know, have silages changed? I mean, I guess thinking about it myself as a child, I used to see a lot wetter silages around.
Absolutely.
A lot more effluent.
Yeah.
And then everyone pushed for the Dutch dry method, and I mean, or you've got more maize has come into it. I mean, what changes have you seen in the time you've been in the industry?
I mean, obviously, I think in terms of silage analysis, there's definitely been an improvement in quality of silage that is being made. I think you're right to say, I think the really wet silage, obviously it's the weather we've had this year particularly has been a challenge for a lot of people. But I think on the whole, dry matters have increased, and I think people are seeing benefits from that. But there's obviously a lot more variation in crops grown now. We're getting much more samples of whole crops, and people including peas, beans, that sort of thing, in legumes. Absolutely. And we're seeing a lot more focus on quality across all feed ingredients. So there's a lot more.
Richard, so what whole crops can you have you got calibrations for?
So we've got a whole crop cereal calibration which covers whole crop wheat, barley, oats, triticale, all those types of materials all go through the same calibration. Then we have a separate calibration for whole crop legumes and legume mixtures. So if it's like oats and peas or barley and peas, that sort of thing, we have a separate legume whole crop legume calibration.
Okay, so you can do them as a separate.
The one thing that does cause us great problems is where you get undersown crops. So if you've got a sample which is 50% grass and 50% whole crop, then you can't use the grass silage calibration and you can't use the whole crop calibration. So then we normally would recommend wet chemistry, and then a lot of people just look at dry matter protein, NDF, that sort of thing.
But other changes over the, I mean, because I'm guessing now we've got multi-cuts, we've got, I don't know. I mean, as you say, what weird and wonderful things do you see these days?
Well, basically anything that's fed on farm can end up in our laboratory. So all sorts of different mixtures of crops. Obviously, the herbal lays now is a lot more interest and focus on that sort of thing. So that's something we're looking to develop at the moment. But yeah, it's, there's also, we're doing a lot of analysis of hay and haylage as well. And, straw, people are looking at everything that is now fed on farm.
Okay. You are seeing more of that because straw is usually just treated as straw, but you're saying people are more looking at it now.
And people, pea straw, bean straw, all these sorts of different things as well.
Yep, definitely.
So there's one question I was going to ask that's just come to mind about sort of mycotoxins. I've seen a little bit in the press recently that this year there could be some higher mycotoxins there. So you do a couple of suites for mycotoxins as well, don't you?
Yeah, we don't do.
Tell us a little bit about those.
We don't offer mycotoxin analysis of foragers from this site. We can subcontract it to another lab. But yeah, there is interest in mycotoxins, the mycotoxin challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think coming back to that comment of maybe seeing an increase in it, the one thing with mycotoxins is it's a very difficult thing to actually pinpoint what problem it will be causing in the cow. But if you think about it, she is going to be having some response to it. So whether it be maybe slightly impacting on fertility or just general performance, I think it's always something to keep in mind, because there is things you can do about it, even if it's a problem that you can't see.
Yeah, I mean, that as you say, that's the biggest problem almost with mycotoxins, is it's such a range of symptoms, or usually most of them are subclinical as well, that it until they literally fall off a cliff, sometimes it's not always the easiest thing to be able to see.
And just because it's one of those hidden things, it is still there, and actually just using a mycotoxin binder can quite often just be a helpful thing to consider if you are wanting to sort of be at the top of the game.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't disagree with that. I'm now looking at the time a little bit and thinking it's probably time we draw this to a close. So I'll start with you first, Richard, if I may. Any last words of wisdom from yourself?
Well, no, it's just thank you for the opportunity, Andrew, to speak to you. I would say that, for me, it's all nice to see the national averages for forage analysis and look at the average figures and see what's happening. But in reality, nobody's got the average silage on farm. So I would recommend to everybody, get your silage analysed and look to your nutritional advisor to get your ration balance for the winter.
Yeah. And Isabelle?
Yeah, echo what Richard says. At the end of the day, your forage is the cheapest form of feed on farm, isn't it? So if you can look at that precision, the balance, and just making the most of what's available, then really that's the best you can do. Keep those clamps analysed and work closely with your nutritionist.
Exactly. Yeah, you've got to be able to quantify what you've got to be able to do it. And I much as I hate to say it, I'd probably say some in the beef industry need to catch up a little bit, because sometimes it is, I'll just do what I've always done, a bit of silage and a bit of cake. Well, actually, using someone like myself a little bit can make a huge difference in terms of performance by ensuring that ration is correctly balanced. So, as you say, it's your biggest feed source. You need to quantify what you've got. Mm-hmm. So go and get it tested. Because it's not a huge expense relative to what otherwise. Because as we said, I've already said I had a client that we cut his blend back by 0.5 kilo a cow for winter. So that was based on the number of cows. That was about 0.75 ton a day, I think it was, or something. No, hold on. No, 0.5 kilo. Oh, my maths has gone out of my head now. I'm going to shut up.
But there are plenty of success stories like that, aren't they?
Yes.
You're not going to lose out from doing it, essentially.
No, exactly. So
you only know what you know.
Exactly. And Sarah?
Well, I've thoroughly enjoyed the tour of what actually happens to that sample. I know that at King's Hay, we send our samples off to you at Trouw. And I quite happily see the results back. So it's really great to actually hear what happens to them, and the fact that you look at each one individually, Richard. That's absolutely fantastic.
I was going to say, when you said that, Richard, I didn't realise you did that when you got 300 or 400. I assumed you must have got a computer that highlights, bang, that's out. That's an outliner. It's whatever, doing it. But for you to actually physically look through everyone as well, that must bit of commitment
they all
at
get
times.
checked, yeah. And then obviously the samples then get stored frozen. So each one after it's been scanned is then packed into a freezer drawer, stored in the freezer. So if you want anything checking or any extra analysis carried out, let us know as soon as possible, because we've only got room to store them in the freezers for about a fortnight from receipt.
I was going to ask, how long have you got? So so exactly, if something's not quite right, or suddenly someone says, I want mineral analysis done, you've got them there on site for about a fortnight to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. I'll bear that in mind.
Yes, well, definitely worth knowing. So on that note, I think I'd like to thank both of our guests today, Richard and Isabelle. So thank you very much for your time and for sharing this with us. So otherwise, I guess it's a goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me.
Okay, thanks a lot.
From me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Tune the Cud podcast, a podcast for the UK dairy industry brought to you from the southwest of England and listened to around the world. And now for the really boring bit, I'm afraid, the legal disclaimer. The information provided during this podcast has been prepared for general information purposes only and does not constitute advice. The information must not be relied upon for any purpose, and no representation or warranty is given to its accuracy, completeness, or otherwise. Any reference to other organisations, businesses or products during this podcast are not endorsements or recommendations of Chewing the Cud Limited. The views of Andrew Jones are personal and may not be the views of Chewing the Cud Limited, and the views of Sarah Bolt are personal and may not be the views of Kingsafe Farming and Conservation Limited and any affiliated companies. For more information on the podcast and details of services offered by Chewing the Cud Limited, visit www.chewingthecud.com. Thank you and goodbye.